old for that. Anyway, I did all kinds of things like that. And one of the things that I found myself doing was hauling a canoe across ice for the first time in 30 years, because we were on Prosperous Lake, which is about 20 kilometers from town, heading to the Tartan Rapids on the Yellowknife River to go to camp overnight. And it was a perfect day in May. The sun was warm, and the air off the ice was cool, and all at once I was back in my book, and back in the experiences that made the book, back with the real people I had traveled with in the late 70s, and back with the characters I invented decades later. And it felt like my book had come to life, or my life had come to life. And underfoot the ice crunched and scraped and tinkled and crumbled. And then we came to open water, and there I was again, back in time, scooting the canoe forward and hopping in at the last moment as the canoe left the ice and entered the water. Everything was familiar, and yet redoubled in force and in beauty by the passage of time. There aren't, at least in my case, that life hasn't been filled with lucky moments like that, but life does have these lucky moments every so often, when you feel the combination of factors that constitutes a life on this earth, when everything comes together instead of falling apart. Now, early in the novel, Dido, the character Dido, has such a moment. Dido is the early part of the book is set in a radio station. Dido is one of the people who works at the radio station, and she cuts a swath because she's a very beautiful woman, and people fall in love with her. In fact, I began by saying that the novel is set in motion when a man hears a voice on the radio and falls in love. Well, the man is Harry Boyd, and the voice he hears on the radio belongs to Dido, who is actually Dutch. So she has an accent when the book begins, and I'll just read this short scene. It would be one of those rare summers when the light is crystalline, the sky deep blue, the air continuously warm. Yellowknife was like a summer residence, a northern resort. It was summer itself. Children were in the playgrounds all night long. Harry's little white house on Latham Island overlooked Back Bay, an extension of Yellowknife Bay, itself an arm of Great Slave Lake. One evening, he enticed Dido to spend time with him by offering to take her sailing on the bay. Later the same week, they went out in his canoe, paddling across Back Bay to the tiny, abandoned cemetery on the opposite shore. Dido asked to get out and wander about, and it was there, in that spot, that she first smelled invisible apples. Transparent fruit, nodded Eleanor a few days later, when Dido thought it wise to bring her along as a chaperone. The pleasant odor, pervasive but without a source, made Eleanor think of other phrases that captured the North as it lit up the human imagination. Garden of Desire, Country of the Mind. That evening, Dido stayed alone in the cemetery while Harry and Eleanor explored the shore. She was kneeling in the long grass, trying to make out the name on a weathered wooden cross, and thinking of her father in his tweed cap and trench coat, an Anglophile until the last. She had learned about his sudden death 3 weeks after it happened, in a letter from her mother, an act of casualness that still dumbfounds her. Now, in the sloping, overgrown shadiness of a faraway cemetery, something extraordinary happens. She hears him call her name, Dido, and she looks around, exactly as she did when she first caught the sweet smell of apples in the air. Dido. Her heart opens wide, and she trembles. The voice is real, not old or quavery, but clear, unmistakable, as confident in her as ever, a steady, loving voice. Not wanting to break the spell, she stays kneeling for several minutes and says nothing to the others. That night she sleeps a long, deep, uninterrupted sleep, and in the morning she dresses for work knowing she's equal to whatever lies ahead. At 5:30 p.m. when she reads the news, her accent is gone, and each word seems to pronounce itself. It was like putting my foot on firm ground, she marveled a few days later when she confessed what had happened. Gwen gave her a look of honest envy, keen and wistful. She'd always wanted the same kind of miraculous release, to be caught up in something so remarkable that she was taken completely out of herself. Whenever I open a book, whenever I read a book, what I hope to find is a living voice. That is to say that the communing tone of mind and heart being revealed. Somebody talking and telling you about what really matters to them. And one of the communing voices is the radio voice. You know, when you're in radio, you speak to an invisible audience, to someone who is no one exactly. And as you speak into the microphone, you're not quite you. And in that tiny space, there can be great amplitude, an escape from the limited self. And this is what Gwen is desperate to find. So Gwen she's about 22 when the book begins, and she has traveled from Ontario by car all the way up to Yellowknife, and by herself, pulling a little trailer. She's adventurous, bold, and very shy. And she gets a job at the radio station, because in those days, in the 70s, you could get work a lot more easily than you can get work now. And you could go to a place like Yellowknife and more or less knock on the door of the CBC and get a job. Now, that's what I did. My first job there was as a receptionist, but soon enough, somebody took off and they needed someone temporary to fill in, and they haul you in and put you in front of a microphone. And this is more or less what happens to Gwen, who is really quite terrible on air at first. She's so nervous and so exposed in front of the microphone that she freezes. And only when she works the late shift does she start to relax, because she's able to turn off the lights. Gwen got bounced out into the midnight woods, and there, night after night, through the month of July, she improved. No one was watching, few were listening. The light was entirely different. Alone in the announce booth, she turned off the overhead light and operated in the jewel-like glow of the little diodes and VU meters. She used headphones, since Andrew McNabb, the head technician, wasn't around to chide her about announcers being addicted to the sound of their own voices. And thus she heard herself close by, not ricocheting around an empty room and careening out over empty wastes, but here, in the dark, warm woods that resembled in a wonderful way the darkness on stage, backstage I should say, the darkness backstage. One night in the basement of the radio station, she found a little sound effects door.